My talk is might be outdated. Not really, because we've seen before, there are still octopus clusters around, but it's about the troublesome adoption of an octopus cluster. Or I would actually frame it as stop calling Ceph stupid names, because giving names to systems, it's outdated. How did my journey begin? How did I end up here? I've studied computer science, and during that time, I was mainly focused on high-performance computing. I did an excursus into Intel Xeon Phis. They are dead since 2017, 2018, as they were still add-in cards. And PCI Express was fairly slow in comparison to the local host memory or even the HBM that was on the Intel Xeon Phi. I did some data race detections on many core systems. Well, in comparison to Ampere, it's not many core systems anymore. It was like 18, 24, maybe 32 core systems, sometimes multi-socket systems. But then again, with Intel Xeon Phis as hybrid systems. And file systems were actually part of my journey as a student researcher. The cluster needed refreshing. It was still running old Intel Xeons. The silver, gold, and platinum Xeons were just released. AMD Ryzen was on the horizon. And we were provided with some machines that we were just able to play around with. The old file system was still running Lustre. It was only backed by HDDs, not a single SSD or even NVMe was inside of it. Lustre at that time was not capable of supporting the performance that NVMe's back then, like 2016, 2017s, were capable of, especially if they're connected via Intel OmniPath. BGFS, or formerly known as Fraunhofer FS, actually ended up winning the race, beating out Lustre and other high-performance file systems. Another topic which is more related to what I'm currently doing is networks. Freifunk Aachen is we provide free internet access without any barriers to anyone who's connecting to our Wi-Fi. Currently, we're hosting about 2,000 access points, and on a normal day, we see like 8,000 clients. On a busy day, it's 10, 11, maybe 12,000 clients. And in 2023, we were pushing about a gigabit of traffic on average. Peak times, we saw somewhere between 2.5 and 4 gigabit. My first, well, I wouldn't call it production Ceph cluster, was a single node Ceph cluster running with Joule. It was nice, it was working, it failed sooner or later, especially if you are used to DRBD and don't understand that Ceph needs more than 2 monitors, but we've heard that before. What I do currently is work at a local ISP. We provide networking for primarily business customers, meaning we run fiber optic cables to their houses or to their facilities. And if they want, they can also get redundant, so geo-redundant uplinks, which means in our case, not a single vertex or edge is joined. Even the exit nodes, for example, we have an internet exchange, or we're at the M6 here in Amsterdam. Feel free to join, to peer with us, or if you're not in Amsterdam, maybe you're in Düsseldorf or Frankfurt. And this means geo-redundancy for us. So one of their exits is towards Amsterdam, one of their exits is towards Frankfurt. We run 2 data centers. The large data center is 80 racks and the small one is 10 racks, which is mainly just networking equipment. And the large data center we are very proud of has power usage effectiveness throughout the last 4 years. It was first put in production in 2020 of 1.12, which is only possible since we're heating the building with the heat of the machines and using water evaporation to provide cooling. Our setup is 2 Ceph clusters. We have about a 1.3 petabyte of total storage, which is tiny in comparison, what I've heard before. It's mixed usage since we're also providing a lot of backup storage. The first Ceph cluster, though, was primarily VMs. And this is where the journey begins. In 2019, we started planning the Ceph cluster and the entire virtualization setup, running as much redundancy as possible. We started deploying our test systems with Ceph Nautilus using Ceph-ansible, which was back then the way to go. We tested out VM migration from our CentOS 7 VM hosts, and with the enterprise virtualizations, which is well, not anymore since CentOS 7 is about to be discontinued, is still available in the EPEL repositories. Live migration towards Ceph was possible, and we used that actually a lot. We installed our first Ceph cluster in 2020, and then COVID hit. So the cluster was sort of running. We tested the hardware. We wanted to deploy Nautilus, but then Octopus came around, and COVID slowed down everything quite a lot. So in the end, we went with Octopus. And then we made a decision. Well, there was a decision made, actually. We went for a custom cluster name, which, looking back, was a pretty stupid idea. As stated, it's primarily focused on VMs. And out of the, back then, about 200 VMs, we were able to live migrate about 150. CentOS 6, there was no live migration just possible. You could have added a step in between, migrating everything, including the storage towards CentOS 7, and then migrating from CentOS 7 into the Ceph cluster. But we had other things to do. In 2021, a second Ceph cluster was added, running Rocky 8, and then not deployed with Ceph-ansible anymore, but with Ceph-admin. This was more focused on backups, since it was the smaller data center. All the VMs needed a proper backup storage, as some of them were actually growing out of their backup storage. It's just running hard disks, NVMEs as wall devices, and some SSDs for just geo-redundant VMs like DHCP servers or name servers. If you look at the two clusters, one is running Pacific with Ceph-admin and containers. The other one is running Octopus with Ceph-ansible and containers. And the initial caveat that we're running is Ceph custom cluster name. Within the last year and a half, I had the job to keep the clusters as simple as possible, so to kiss the clusters. Meaning I had to migrate. Migrating an Octopus cluster, if you just look at the Ceph documentation, is fairly straightforward. You migrate the configuration, you adopt the monitors and managers, you enable the Ceph-admin backend, and then you just start adopting the OSDs and redeploying the rest. With our cluster, it went a little different. We had a custom cluster name. Adopting the mons and managers went fine. You could also tell Ceph-admin, you're the orchestrator now. It was happy. It just started complaining, obviously, hey, there are so many services not under my control. And then Murphy enters the room. So let's say hi to Murphy. This is actually one of our office dogs. He's just here for moral support. Essence, yeah, the trouble started. Ceph-admin expects Ceph as the cluster name. It can easily persuade it to talk to a different cluster by adding the cluster tag or a cluster option and providing the special name. Adopting the daemons seemed fairly straightforward, even with custom cluster names. It looked like they were adopted properly. The Ceph admin created new system D units and they failed to start. This was unexpected since everything else beforehand just worked out fine. Looking at Ceph admin, they just stopped the legacy container, or very briefly, they stopped the legacy container, create a new system D unit, create new homes with the entire configuration and so on. And then they just tried to start the new system D unit. The container, though, as I said, it's just crashed. So I started executing the run script of the container manually and just logged unable to load Ceph configuration. Ceph configuration not found. Where in the world do you get this name from? If you look at the run script, it clearly stated copy the Ceph configuration into the container under etc ceph.conf. Well, that somewhat obviously explains that there's no not Ceph configuration, but where does it still get the name from? The LVM tags. The LVM tags of each OSD contain quite a lot of information. It contains, for example, the cluster ID. It contains the block device, even though it is the block device. It contains a certain block UUID, and it contains the cluster name. When the container is started, everything is validated, and since the cluster name is not the same as expected, fails to start. This actually finally explains why not Ceph is not found, since it just looks for the configuration that is actually the configuration name that is embedded in the LVM tags. So we have two options. We can edit the container run script, or we can edit the LVM tags. Which option would you go for? Well, initially we went for the first option. It worked. Container starts. So you think job done. Until you have to redeploy it. Because then the entire configuration is rewritten and you have to, once again, edit the run script. Or otherwise the OSD fails to start. So the second option is a little dirtier. You you have to edit the LVM tags. You can, with LVM, change everything, including the tags. Delete the old cluster name, add the new cluster name. The container starts. And the dirty part is, this can be done while the legacy OSD is still running, which reduces downtime. So with the change LVM tags, the legacy container started right up, and it still worked after being redeployed, which made me really happy. So I could just adopt all OSDs and redeploy the rest, even though with a custom cluster name, the Rados gateways and everything else still needed adjustment. Now you probably understand why I stated initially that calling Ceph stupid names might be a strong statement, but in this circumstance, it was definitely the right statement. And if you look at servers or VMs, or maybe your kids, finding names might be hard. Using names with Ceph just makes it hard. Thanks. Any questions? It Has anyone else experienced a similar problem with running as? Let me give it a try. Oh.
Oh, it's soft. It's soft. It's soft. Do you still see a reason to name your Ceph cluster?
Microphone doesn't work.
It's not working? It's working, right?
No.
I think I hear myself. It kind of works. I have trouble with microphones. We know that now. Do you still see a reason to name your clusters something else than Ceph?
No, I definitely do not.
Okay.
I think I made
Feels like a feature discussion then.
with Ceph-ansible, running the Ceph cluster with Ceph-ansible, giving it a custom cluster name was fairly easy. It was just a single line that you had to add during the Ceph-ansible run. Ceph-admin honestly is not in any way aiming at running custom cluster names. So migrating the Ceph-ansible cluster just to make the cluster more similar, to make running two different clusters using though the same software, Ceph-admin as an orchestrator, it was an experience to say the least.
Thank you very much. Nice one for you as well.